Hello everyone, and welcome to Fleet's Extra Ramblings 2, your second Extra Ramblings this week, just in case the first one wasn't enough for you. Well, doesn't really matter. The problem is that what we basically need is a Ramblings that gives us a decent question to work through, so that we kind of, well, have something to, well, how would I put this gently? We would basically need more, a backlog of questions. Because otherwise I can't really, well, without a backlog we can't have catch-up ramblings, so we've got extra ramblings. Again, probably be a fairly short one today. Probably an hour and 20 minutes, there or thereabouts, give or take. That's about what we're looking at. Of course, this is a reminder to those who are Fleet's Fantastic Funders. Don't forget, you do have a question before everyone else's. Well, there's supposed to be a community chat for you, but it doesn't seem to be extant anymore. Which I do find a little bit weird. What the what? Okay, Patreon's having a bit of a moment, but hey ho, what are you gonna do? Yeah, Patreon seems to be having a bit of a moment today, but I think it'll recover in a minute. But yes, Fleet's Extra Ramblings. It's a thing that I do now while I'm not working. There we go. Excellent, 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 fantastic, brilliant, huge. Marvellous. More Red Fleet Timeline? No. Brandon, does the title say Red Fleet Timeline? No, it doesn't.
Yeah, lol.
Probably a short one. Like, I'm not really going for too long, just for about an hour.
An hour. That many questions either.
Yeah, well, it's an extra ramblings. That's why it's an extra, not a catch up, because there's not really much to catch up on. I'm actually going to let the questions build.
Build up again.
Yeah, basically, because there's no point having a catch up ramblings if it lasts 5 seconds.
Exactly. Any point in history you could travel back to and live in, what would you choose and why?
I would love to see if I could travel back and have the equivalent in wealth I have now translated into old British pounds directly, aka the amount of new pounds I have now is the amount of old pounds I have, or I would have, and travel back to just after the end of the Napoleonic Wars. I'd love to live through the 19th century. What an interesting period that would to be an Englishman, especially a well-off Englishman. See the world.
Honestly, I wouldn't really want to live in any history previous, because, to be honest, most of my knowledge is more useful now. Others would not believe it necessarily, even if I tried to.
Well, I would. Well, I don't want to go back and spread knowledge. I just want to live through the 19th century, see it firsthand.
I wouldn't. It's awful then.
It's not that. Not as a upper class Englishman.
Even as an upper class Englishman, it's not great. Relatively speaking, like. Honestly, I'm pretty comfy with what we have today. Spiteful's asking why you did Foxhole dirty, Fleet.
I didn't.
I would tend to agree with Fleet, you didn't.
Chandler asks, hello at Fleet of Oceans, how are your impressions of the new Hoi 4 DLC? It's one of the best we've had for a while. I mean, it is, Dragon. It's given us more content than we've had for ages. It's...
in groups that didn't need it.
What? People have been banging on for a German focus tree for years now.
They had one. They had a quite reasonable one for a very long time.
Well, I mean...
there's other nations that needed it more. Also, did we really need the Belgian Congo as a...
I think
like, the fact that Belgian Congo has a tree on the at the basically same size as the United Kingdom.
It's bigger than the UK's tree, actually, a little bit.
Thank you for proving my point.
It's not really a point.
It is the fact that it focused on the wrong aspects, honestly. The secret project thing in certain aspects is good.
I mean,
in others I find it a bit silly.
I mean, it's all good. There's nothing wrong with it.
I don't understand why like certain things needed to be special projects.
Because it's not so much to do with... it's called special projects.
Like flamethrower tanks shouldn't be a special project. Neither should cruiser subs.
It's called special projects because it's a nice, catchy buzzword. But what it basically is research towards things that are outside normal things that nations would normally acquire. So, for example, not every nation would acquire a flamethrower tank. Not every nation constructs armored engineering vehicles. Not every nation constructs cruiser, midget submarines, or electro boats.
Fleet.
Yes.
How many nations actually did build flamethrower tanks?
I could think of at least 4.
Yeah.
United Kingdom, France,
yes.
America, Germany,
yes.
Italy,
yes.
Russia, Japan.
Yep.
It's not a special project. It was a very commonly considered thing. Even Poland was looking into it before their tank project fell apart.
Greece,
The country
Turkey,
collapsed.
Iran, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Thailand, Nicaragua...
most of these weren't even having tanks at this point.
But in Hoi 4, it's reasonable that a player-led nation, if a player on those nations would develop tanks.
Well, that's what the researchers normally could. A lot of these are very much a case of, these could have been standard research.
I mean,
some of them I understand.
I mean,
others. Cruiser subs should be available to most nations from the get-go to begin with, or at least the larger ones, because most nations already had them.
I think most nations do have access to them now.
But they still have to do special projects.
No, I don't think the US and France do. I don't think the US, France, or Japan have to. I think
to be honest, this DLC is primarily catching on to weeaboos and werbs going, ooh, my special project.
I feel like that's a massive disservice to the work that's gone into the system and is a massive slap in the face to everyone who actually enjoys the new system.
It's literally not. But...
So, am I a wereaboo and a weeaboo for enjoying the special projects, Dragon?
And that's not what I said, though, did I?
No, but that's the way it could be taken. So I'd be very careful how you phrase your fucking language.
I won't be. No, I will say it as I mean it. And if you are going to insinuate things off it, that is your own creation.
Well, I mean,
not mine.
You do realise that's the sort of language that's been used to defend horrific speech, right?
That sort of phrase can be used to defend anything, your point. Honestly, the DLC should not have been about Germany, Belgium, etc. A lot of other groups needed it more. Looks at the Commonwealth.
No, the Commonwealth is fine. It doesn't need any work.
What do you mean it's fine?
Canada has a perfectly acceptable focus tree. The South.
No, it doesn't.
For what they did in the Second World.
The fact that Scandinavia has a more Commonwealth-based focus than the Commonwealth does. The fact that most Commonwealth nations, including Britain, have all basically pathetic focus trees. Britain has the only one that's remotely reasonable. The others just don't, because they were the very first DLC.
Yes, so is it fair then that
Germany, which has had multiple updates in later DLCs, should not have been the first.
I just feel like this. I felt there's bias here. I don't think you're being objective.
Well, no, China deserved it more than Germany did. Honestly, because they were basically the second major DLC.
Yes, this is correct. But
so
again,
instead of going for ones that have had updates more frequently,
this doesn't change the fact.
They should have went to the beginning.
This doesn't change the fact. While we can all agree on who may have needed focus tree reworks more, doesn't change the fact that the DLC is good.
I'd say it's mediocre.
It's
what we expected. It's nothing truly beyond what we were wanting.
I disagree. I was surprised at some of the way they've worked in some of the.
You're always surprised when Hoy releases anything, though.
No, I was a little bit disappointed with the South American DLC.
No, you were going on at the time about how much you liked it.
Okay, time to ruin Fleet's Friday while I'm building a sea power and testing a sea power scenario.
Yeah. Either way,
and it involves a little bit of alternate history.
The latest thoughts on the latest
Oriole class got built.
Yeah, but either way, I feel like we always have a difference of opinion on this thing. I think any new content is good content, and I'm sure Britain with the Commonwealth will get their shake. But that's just me.
Oh, what are we talking about?
The latest Hoy DLC.
We're just winding down about that and moving on.
Fleet thinks it's utterly remarkable. I think it's honestly mediocre and was focused on the wrong areas.
It's Hearts of Iron 4. I'm sure everybody by this point knows my opinion as a former modder. The game itself is wildly mediocre and is coded like it was made by amateur modders and not good ones.
Could entirely understand that.
Yeah, I could agree with that one. CJ Clow 05 asks, atomic bomb is detonated at Jutland at the start of the engagement. What happens? Well, first of all,
how big?
Yes. What atomic bomb? Where is it detonated? What altitude? Is it dropped? Is it in the water? Is it falling? Is it on one of the ships?
What do you mean by at the start?
Do you mean at the start of the run to the south? Do you mean at the start of the where Jellicoe's long arc of battleships opens up on the High Seas Fleet? Do you mean during the night action? Same at Bikini Atoll when the first capital ships opened fight. Okay, where is it then? Where is this atom bomb? Is it between the two fleets? Is it on a British ship? Is it on a German ship?
Also, what year?
Or is it like the Bikini Atoll tests where it just misses initially?
Yeah.
No, the Bikini Atoll test was what?
Between the fleets. So it's between the fleets, equidistant in the water. I'm sorry, if you're detonating a hydrogen bomb at the ranges we're talking in between the two fleets. Yeah, well, the British and German battle cruisers are just kill, because they're not even 20,000 yards apart, and you've put a hydrogen bomb in between them. Good fucking luck.
Oh, sorry, yeah, Bikini, not. Well, which one? Are we talking Crossroads, or are we talking Castle Bravo?
Yes, I'm assuming Castle Bravo, because Crossroads may actually mean something survives.
But Crossroads was the one that was dropped on ships.
Oh well. If it's Crossroads, then honestly, and if it's in the water, I don't know if any ships will actually get sunk.
Depends on the range. The other problem is the transmission of shock through the water. Contrary to popular belief, ships of this era are actually pretty terrible at absorbing sudden, acute, immediate shock.
So if
writ large structurally.
So if an atom bomb goes off directly between the two battlecruiser lines when they're just opening fire, and the range I believe was about 15,000 yards when the Germans opened up and opened the engagement between the two fleets, so that means there'd be about 7,000 yards-ish between each line and the atom bomb, which is sitting in the water. That is probably not going to go well for anybody.
It looks like they engaged at about 14 kilometers between each other. So it'd be 7 kilometers between the two. They detonated in an increment point.
How much is that in yards?
No clue. I stopped using yards quite a long time ago.
7,000 meters is 7,600 yards.
Yeah, so basically, like, I was pretty much right on the money.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you're basically looking at well, you're basically looking at the possibility of both battle lines, both lines of battle cruisers and the destroyers that are in between the two fleets ceasing to be.
The 5th Battle Squadron will be happy they were late.
Yes, although they might be suffering damage themselves. And everyone with sights actually to the outside will probably be blind.
It depends if they're looking at it or not, but...
Yeah.
Indeed, most people will be confused of what just happened, and the Germans are crying in a corner of, well...
There go our battle
there went
cruisers.
the battle cruiser fleet.
And the British will go, well, there go some of our battle cruisers.
Yeah, the British are going, that's annoying.
Ah, crap, Beatty's dead.
Bring up the spares.
Oh well.
Yeah. Well, BT being dead is a problem for the interwar period. Because BT actually fights the RN's core.
He wasn't
well.
He wasn't a good fighting admiral. He was a good peacetime admiral because he knew how to play the politics, and he could get that to work for the Navy. He was a terrible battle admiral.
Mm-hmm. So that was that. Bone Meal Boy asks, what was the big bottleneck for naval construction in the Age of Sail? Was it guns, mass, or something else? Mass timbers were basically timber generally was the bottleneck. Because if you're talking the classic Age of Sail, there's no iron framing or iron straps or basically any form of iron apart from nails involved in ship construction.
It the bottleneck?
Yes.
Well, it's
Because
also just curing time is a big thing.
Yeah, curing time's the bottleneck. The actual forest issue is not the problem. Getting good mass timber is why you notice mass deforestation in England.
It's not so much mass timber but mass timber is a problem, but there's also getting big, solid, single timbers just for the square frames that make up ships of the line and frigates.
Again, that's not the problem at the time, fleet. Remember, at this point in time, Britain still has gigantic, old forests.
There are
very good for this.
There are
it's
multiple...
why I said there's a mass deforestation of England.
Yes, I'm aware, Dragon, but it's important to bear in mind that you can deforest. You do mass deforestation. Do you have any idea how hard it is to select a correct size beam of timber that's going to be a single piece of one of 4 to hold up a ship of the line? It's not just something you go, yes, I pick this tree and I'll turn it into
actually,
my
I've
beam.
done woodwork.
No, it is though. You just go up, you find the tree that's big enough.
Sorry,
go, that one.
Your little woodwork shop experience.
That's not how that works.
No.
But Fleet, I don't think you also have the full knowledge of it either. To be frank.
Yeah, quite frankly, neither of you do.
Yeah, that's why I'm not saying. I've got.
Fleet, I think you're overestimating the difficulty, and Dragon, I think you're underestimating the difficulty here. Finding old growth trees that are also applicable for large diameter single piece beams is not easy. you can go, oh, that's an ideal tree. Cut it down, and you start prepping it, right? And then you realize it's not. You get halfway through the process. Got to get rid of this one. Throw it out. Or turn it into other components. Because you can do that with lumber. You cut it differently. As long as you're not too far through. It's one of the reasons that you saw such mass deforestation, because they had to cut down so much timber just to find the good enough timber. Because it's a statistics game. Is that really the bottleneck, though? Not
No.
really. It's the curing time.
No,
Yeah.
and there's also
But you said it was the
Fleet, you literally said
just
it
said
was.
that it was the problem.
No,
Yes.
Yes, you did.
Would you please?
Fleet, do I need to start recording these myself so I can
Oh no,
go
he's
through an
he's
instant replay?
recording it. You can literally go back on the live stream.
If you didn't fucking cut me off, I could have finished my sentence and said that yes, you were right. If you don't mind, thank you.
But anyone else
mind?
get that? He's
What I was gonna say was, no, you're quite right. I was wrong. I was getting my wires crossed between the late and early age of sail. What was one of the actual bottlenecks prior to the Industrial Revolution taking off in the late 18th, early 19th century was actually some of the things that used to require precision manufacturing before mechanization. Things like tackle for handling the rope, so the wooden blocks that you would use to handle the rope before mechanization. The manufacture of those, given how many you would need for an individual ship, could be quite time-consuming. Because it wasn't a job that you could... Because they had to be made to a fairly precise specification, but there was no mechanization available. There weren't machines you could use to really speed up the process in a major way. And it was quite manpower-intensive.
But at the end of the day, how long does it take compared to literally just having to let the ship just sit there for, years to, in some circumstances, to, actually cure and
well, it's
set
not
itself?
so much... It was fine when you had a continuous stream of ship construction, because you'd always have cured wood
That would be the
ready.
same with the blocks, then. Because you just constantly be making blocks.
The problem was...
And then... When a ship is done curing, here is a pile of blocks.
Well, it's not so much that the ships themselves would cure, is that the wood that you would have cured wood ready to go to construct a ship. And
But then you'd also need to cure that wood into the shape of the ship.
like
You have to actually just leave a ship. When it is in all the bits to cure, because that's the position it now is with relation to all the other bits.
Well,
it's part of the reason why Victory had a. It's part of the reason Victory was renowned for how hard its wood was, because it was built during wartime. Then the war ended, so it was just left there to cure for like far longer than it was meant to. When they got back to it, it's like, this is really good now. This is by accident. Like, this is actually said
that's
by the
why
Victory
Victory
Preservation Committee and multiple people who are way above us in terms of qualification.
The point I'm making is that there's a reason why you see an explosion in the size and scale of ships and how much rigging area they have once the Industrial Revolution really takes off. Because you can just produce that much more block and tackle.
I would
you
say
can also, build bigger dry docks.
Yeah.
Well, no, I said size of sail area, not size of ship. Because to manage more sail, you need more rope. To handle more rope, you need more block and tackle.
It doesn't make rope quicker.
Industrialization helps that, but honestly, with the vast industry that was there at the time, which wasn't automated, you can make quite a bit. There's entire reasons why large sections of the North were meant for that.
Yes, you can.
Which then died when industrialization kicked off.
You can do that, but there is the jump in scale is between manufacturing by hand and manufacturing by machine cannot be understated. Sorry, overstated, I mean, sorry. 1981 asks, okay, so why is it considered that if the Russians hadn't sold Alaska to the US, the Brits would invade and take it? That is an opinion I've never seen from anywhere. If Russia...
Why would the Brits take Alaska?
What was this question?
1971 asks, okay, so why is it considered that if the Russians hadn't sold Alaska to the US, the Brits would have invaded and taken it?
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it's...
And
if Russia doesn't sell Alaska, Russia just keeps it.
yeah.
And there may be tensions with Britain and the US when the gold rushes kick off, which then will make it a somewhat attractive area. But I highly doubt those tensions will ever boil high enough to lead to an actual conflict.
I will say, because I don't think this would affect Russian history much, keeping Alaska, I will say that during the whole revolutionary period and Civil War, they're not keeping it.
No, probably not.
Either that or it becomes a sort of Taiwan-esque situation where it's like
really
the last holdout of the whites.
Imagine being exiled to Alaska. That would just...
I mean, the funniest thing is...
There's parts of it that are all right.
Yeah. The most annoying thing about that is that
it wouldn't be very prosperous.
No, and you probably have an overcrowding problem, as a lot of white sympathizers might try and flee there, which would lead to strife, overcrowding. As the colony
just
tries
end
to
up.
adjust.
They probably still end up going to the U.S. West Coast, anyways.
Yeah,
like they did historically.
Along
with a lot of people who fled the Soviet Union.
Yeah, the weird thing is, you might see a white government that will look at the German invasion of the USSR during the Second World War and go, maybe we should ally with these people, which will probably then get the US and Britain coming down on their heads.
Probably not. They'd be so utterly dependent on the US in that scenario because they have to import food.
Oh, yeah.
There's a reason Spain stayed out, and this would be even worse for them. They wouldn't consider it.
No. It would basically just remain as the Hermit Kingdom in the north, probably the last stronghold of some obscure member of the Romanov dynasty, and probably one of the world's...
Probably not. Probably not Romanovs. More likely some former White Russian general, or colonel.
Hello.
Hello, Foxo.
Lion said, do you not think Britain would want to finish off the area and it end up becoming a part of Canada? Probably not. The problem is there's no direct.
It doesn't connect into Canada.
Yeah, there's no. We did this last week. There's no way by land, sea, and air until you get to the 21st century to link. And even then, it's only by air in the 21st century that you can really link to Canada. To Alaska from Canada.
Well, you have by ferry and boat, but to Vancouver. But Vancouver's got to build up.
And even then, that's not the most hospitable coastline in the world by ship for sure. So
far from it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right, so,
Discord?
Yes.
You've actually just answered 2 YouTubes there.
Yes. Well, no. The reason the other one was brought in was because it was related to the topic currently under discussion. So it made more sense to lump it in then, rather than leave it to later. Brandon Larson, what if the Roman Empire had continued to expand east and eventually encountered China? How would a war or wars between them go? Rome and China did. Yeah, they did encounter each other. They both considered...
They knew of each other. They traded.
But got in the way in the middle.
Because
Parthians, that's it.
Yeah, because there's literally nothing yes, let's fight over terrain that's incredibly far from our centers of logistics and communications.
Fleet. That has nothing to do with it. The Romans tried.
What?
They ran headlong into the Parthians and repeatedly got boots shoved up their asses.
Yeah,
the
again,
Parthians,
the
Or I
Parthians got
should
in the
say,
way.
lances and arrows, like spears and arrows, horseback.
you gotta remember the
Um,
Parthians had a very big interest in making sure that the Romans and Chinese did not meet and talk and did not form any kind of alliance against them because the
It
Parthians
made them a
scrapped
ton of
squabbled with
money.
both of them.
Ugh.
So ironically enough, really the furthest where Rome really goes further east in terms of trade and influence is actually the Indian Ocean. They trade quite a bit with India. They trade with what's now Southeast Asia, Indonesia. So there's Roman coins all over that region. But and the Indians are well aware. Indian kingdoms are well aware of the Romans and such. But for China, it was much more because the actual route to China is so much harder over land. And again, you had the Parthians, you had the Bactrian kingdoms, it's Greek city-states that were out there because of Alexander's conquests, who actually fought the Chinese quite a lot because the Chinese slowly crushed them over time. But very interesting region of the world in that period. Not much
You
talked
also
about, but
have-
very interesting region of the world.
You also have like a mostly united India at that point under one of the dynasties.
Depends on which period of Roman
Yeah, which
context
part
you're
of
talking
which point of
about.
Roman
'Cause
history we're talking
it is a
Sort
very
of-
long period we're talking
So
about.
there is periods where India itself is almost unified.
Keyword almost.
Like,
Yeah, but because you got the Tamil kings in the south, but we don't talk about the Tamil kings.
I
Nobody
knew
talks about
I
Tamil
knew you were gonna
kings.
fucking go there. I don't know.
Yes, there's your. I gave your images to Soul, and that's what he did with them.
What did what with what? What now?
Look in theatre at sea.
Oh, you've
and
got
you'll
to
see-
be
you'll
kidding me.
Pinged.
Oh.
Don't worry, it's not that yet.
No, but it's still great. Now Fleet's getting memes thrown at him, which may or may not be accurate.
Next.
Yes. Next. It's a word that exists.
Alright, well, see, this is like 1,000 to 2,000 years before the Mughals.
yeah, the Gupta Empire's around towards the late Roman Empire, but by then the Parthians have actually gone as Sassanids that are between the
Yeah.
Romans and the Indians and the Han
and
Chinese by that
the
point.
Sassanids are making shitloads of money off of the trade
Yeah.
and are more than strong enough to keep the two apart.
Yeah, because it's also, power projection for them. Like the ability for China to project power that far west was limited, and likewise the same with the Romans going east because, well, frankly, by that point they had a lot more shit to worry about. But also, you have to fight through the Sassanids really to get to a lot of these trade routes, which is part of why there was so much squabbling up around what's now Armenia and the Caucasus. But, anywho.
Bone Meal Boy asks, how long would it take for the US to set up the requisite naval industries and dockyards, assuming Congress goes all in on naval spending post-1776 to challenge the Royal Navy? Well, first of all, once Congress has lynched whatever idiot came up with that idea and realized, oh, we've just passed the bill already, we actually have to do it, and then once they finish crying about how much money they're about to waste on a impossible challenge, you're basically looking at them never achieving it prior to the Civil War. They will never be able to match the Royal Navy prior to the American Civil War, and even after it.
I'd say it'd take them about 100 and something year, 120, 130 years, sort of about when Dreadnought comes out.
You basically need the US.
They need a reset.
Yeah, you need a reset like Dreadnought.
I'd say they could probably manage it before Dreadnought because really the U.S. has eclipsed the British and the British Empire in terms of industrial capacity by 1900. It's probable the late pre-Dreadnought period they could have surpassed them.
Yeah, basically it's the only way it happens is if during the 1880s onwards US Navy period, if Congress goes, instead of building a fleet that's able to secure local space, opens floodgates. Then the US could.
Well, they could have opened the
Not even
floodgates
that.
earlier. It was just a question of when you cumulatively get up to the point of it's when the Americans have the industrial capacity and the manpower to really start matching the Royal Navy in terms of numbers cumulatively over time. Because you're talking about what happens when you keep the Age of Sail fleet going up through the steam frigate era into actually having a large ironclad fleet, because the U.S. Navy, remember, did not have an ironclad fleet at all, really,
No.
practically speaking. And basically jumped directly into the game of steel battleships, what we call pre-dreadnoughts now.
Yep.
Which they expanded their fleet quite rapidly at that point, but it was never going to compare to say the British, who had already had their whole ironclad era and then started the pre-dreadnought building even earlier. But it's a very different story if the U.S. Navy is something the U.S. is actively trying to bulk out much earlier.
Next.
So yeah,
Pizza.
Brackman asks, given the currently publicly available technologies, how would the panel approach the design and construction of a functional warship for space? Please outline the key specifications, materials, propulsion systems, and any defense or weapon systems you would incorporate, considering the limitations and challenges of space warfare.
I call it the F-15.
Well, no, like, you don't build a space warship.
Foxo.
Foxo, by the way, you're breathing.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the real answer is you don't. We're not there. There's no reason to do so whatsoever.
Honestly, I know a lot of people like to point to expansive ways of doing it. Honestly, I don't think even Expanse would do it. You just don't, honestly, unless you're getting to quite ludicrous levels of technology. Space warfare is just something you try and avoid at all costs.
No, I'm not even going to say that. I would say right now, there's no reason to really do it. In an environment like the Expanse, there is, because you need to assert control of zones of space.
I'm more saying the way Expanse, the way Expanse does it doesn't really pan out either. But
it's one of the better imaginations of it. But it is still as fiction catering to expectations.
Yeah.
This is one of the things where space warfare is going to be extremely, extremely boring from like the perspective of how we view other forms of warfare. It's just a completely different dynamic, and there's really no good way to translate it to current forms of warfare we have either at sea or in the air. And again, I think that as Cyclic was kind of driving at, there's just functionally no reason to pursue a space warship of any kind, because space combat, as of right now, it's basically it's satellites and downing satellites and satellites attacking each other. There's no you're fighting over the space between say the moon and the Earth or anything like that. There's nothing to actually build a warship to combat really. Anything that's going to be hanging out in Earth orbit or lower or any kind of satellite orbit is going to be very vulnerable to missiles fired from Earth.
Again, F-15, hello.
Wellesley suggesting lasers everywhere.
Lasers
kind of suck.
Yeah, they're useless.
Because your beam expands as range increases. So just because of the way focusing light works, you're not going to be able to achieve the energy on target you need very far away from you.
All you need is a little thing with an RCS thruster on it that you just smash into it at orbital velocity.
Lasers, if anything, lasers would be used as trying to basically knock out missile targeting beyond that. But no. Also, you've got another major problem.
I'm not even sure they'd be viable point defense because
lasers
when you
need a lot of
they're going so quickly that
we don't know.
No.
Missiles don't work like people think they work, even in atmosphere, but in space especially.
Space, why do you use a missile?
For quite a lot of reasons, actually. It's one of the main reasons, like SM-3 is a missile. It's the same thing.
If you're going from void to void, why would you not just accelerate an inert projectile?
Because you still need the ability to maneuver.
If you accelerate it high enough.
You need RCS thrusters. You're not using fins, you're not using anything like that. You're basically using a kill vehicle that you accelerate with a booster. That is a missile.
It essentially gets some analogous to stuff like the Excalibur shells.
No,
where they're fired from a launcher at high velocity, then they guide themselves at terminal phase.
No. Those are fundamentally aeroballistic projectiles. They're just guided.
I posted a picture in the text chat.
yes,
That's
the
the kill
funny-
vehicle for SM3.
The funny kill
This is
vehicle.
what we're talking about for when it comes to killing things in space with direct hit weapons, so KKVs and such.
Yeah, and this is not too long before impact ejected from the booster assembly,
Look at him,
which
he's
gives it the
adorable.
velocity it needs, and then it has RCS thrusters on board so that it can aim itself and keep track with the target and deal with any evasive maneuvers.
I'm sorry, but that is the most adorable little warhead I've ever seen.
Not a warhead.
Sorry, kill
It's a
vehicle.
lump of metal.
It's the small
Well,
boy.
okay. Question: Why
But
is it not just a large mass of ball bearings or something?
Oh,
Because
yes.
you need to put a seeker on it because things can maneuver. You need to put small propellant tanks for the RCS thrusters, whether they're cold gas or hot gas, doesn't really matter.
And unlike
You need the batteries to run everything. You need the wiring for that. You need insulation to protect your electronics. You see how this all starts adding up?
And also,
Yeah.
unlike on Earth, it'll keep going if you miss.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Depends
that's
on where
not really an issue.
Depends on where
Foxo, it
you
is.
are.
It is an issue.
Depends.
Foxo.
It's not depending on where you
Okay,
are. Flex.
hang on. Just full stop. If you're in orbit or low orbit, it won't, unless you exceed orbital escape velocity. If you are on orbit, particularly low orbit, you still have drag. You will eventually deorbit unless there is something to boost you back.
But in comparison to a bullet flying through the air, it'll stay in a dangerous space for a lot longer than.
Yes, depending on what altitude you're talking about and interesting gravity around the object. Around the moon, if you don't achieve lunar escape velocity, it actually won't stay up there for too long. It's very hard to keep things in orbit on the moon because of how, for lack of a better term, lumpy the gravity is for the moon, because it's not a fully truly.
But then ultimately, you've still got an
differentiated
unpredictable.
uniformly
Well,
object.
technically, it is still very predictable, but you still have to get out of the way of it. Projectile just hurtling through space.
Yeah, this is why
Yeah.
these
Towards
kill
all
vehicles...
of your soft bits.
Yeah, this is why these
Yeah,
kill
but wouldn't that
vehicles
be
are
a
better.
positive though? Because if you're
No,
aiming
not
to
if
take
you've
out
got
a
your own-
satellite constellation,
Okay.
wouldn't you want?
Not if your own satellite constellation is anywhere near it.
So,
Yeah, that's it. Yes,
so
and
many
no.
misconceptions in less than 10 seconds. I'm doing this while I'm on sick leave, and so I'm not feeling well, and I've got a headache.
This isn't my
I
fault.
don't even know where to begin.
This is... I feel like Foxo, you're about to get schooled.
No, it
Oh,
was
hang on.
the thing that kicked it off, Fleet, was your comment too. But
What? No, well, I'm about to get schooled. But then again, what,
Also,
else is, what else is new?
Phoenix, can you step in here because my brain, the gears are barely
on.
meshing right now.
I'm not space expert, so I'm not sure if I'm the right one to answer this. What were the chain of comments again? Because
Or do we just want to move on? Is that easier?
Let's just move on.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know we're going to get talking about how
And
lazy other
as
problems in space.
as a way to move on, the last ramblings I was in, I misspoke. I mentioned that the Constellation class were the first U.S. frigates to feature a variable depth sonar. They are not. The Knox class were. The Knox class, however, was solely an active system. The Constellations, it is an active passive system in addition to their towed array, which you can also do funny things with and get below the layer or above the layer and all sorts of stuff with the towed array as well. But I just wanted to address that bit of information.
Yeah, I feel like we should move on.
Just
from
got a
this
quick
bit.
question. for
No,
Cyclic.
no,
No, it's about the towed array. No.
Okay, that's fine.
It's with sort of the towed array. Why would a ship, especially a large service combatant, have a passive sonar array? Because wouldn't it make sense just be constantly active?
No. So think about. This is going to be a very broad overview. There are plenty of reasons to use active sonar. particularly as you look across the spectrum of frequencies. But generally speaking, for just broad awareness of and trying to get a hit on something, and a hit I mean like hear a hint that something is out there. The general best way to do that is literally just hydrophones, because you're not going to give away your position. Think about it like it's a dark night, right? And you're just looking with your eyes, right? You're up on a hill looking out. Somebody turns on a flashlight 2 miles away. Are they ever going to see you? Probably
really?
not. Yeah. However, you know exactly where they are.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they move that beam towards you and you can physically see the light.
This is why I always question in horror films why they turn on the flashlights in the dark room. Like, all you're doing is telling the...
Well, if you're in a small space, it's helpful. If you're out in a valley, right, it's just gonna tell everybody where exactly you are.
And just
Like,
bringing this
honestly,
back
lights
to
in
the
horror
question
films
of-
make a lot more sense.
Just to bring this back to the ships themselves, it's worth remembering that there are things like dedicated anti-submarine warfare frigates that, you know, they'll have their very large, they'll have their sonar systems that are either, you know, because their propulsion is rafted, they can use the hull sonar for passive detection, or if they have the active passive towed array, right, where it's further away from the hull, so they get less noise from the machinery or the flow noise around the hull, right, because usually you go in at a lower speed when you have your tail down. Sometimes you can be quieter than submarines. Depending on the design that you of the ship and the submarines you're dealing with. So there are a lot of cases where, you know, you don't want to give away where you are for free, because you have a good chance of picking up that submarine that might not actually realize you're there, especially if it's, say, trying to sprint itself.
How would this surface ship be stealthier than a submarine?
By being quiet.
Well,
Sure, you just the noise of wave action, which would mean the submarine would know where you are through its own hydrophones.
Depends
even
on
if
if the
you weren't
submarine can
pinging.
actually listen to you or not. 'Cause remember, because part of this is a submarine crawling. Yes, definitely has an advantage in this regard, but if the submarine is sprinting, it's deaf, so it's not going to probably be picking up the wave noises. Likewise, you know, there are things you can do to mitigate that kind of acoustic radiation as well. So, and as Moo is saying, yes, you get surface clutter on sonar as well, so it can be hard to necessarily pick up specifically hull waves slapping against a hull versus all the other background noises, especially if that ship is, say, if the ship that's actually hunting the submarine is being mixed in with other types of ships in the area. It may be a less obvious return than, say, a merchant hull or, say, a destroyer that doesn't have any kind of serious quieting.
Yeah. The other aspect of this is almost every bit of quieting you can do to a submarine, if you want to, you can do to a surface ship. There's very little reason you can't. So the idea that a submarine is necessarily quieter than a surface ship just really isn't true. It's just that a lot of surface ships, it's for their role, it's not really meaningfully worth the cost. But then you have ships that, like, you know, the Zumwalt class, for example, which were designed to be replacements for the Spruance class destroyers, is primarily ASW destroyers with strike added on after that, and not later, but as a secondary role. And these ships are very scarily quiet. We don't have any confirmation of this, but I've heard from multiple people that would have heard this themselves that the Zumwalts tend to do some scary things in force-on-force ASW exercises. like sneaking up on submarines.
That's
The Frem
hilarious.
have done this as well. I mean, they do it
Frem
regularly.
have done this. I'm sure Type
Yeah.
26 will be able to do this.
Yeah.
And it's just because you put the effort into designing the ships and building them so that they're quiet when they want to be. They're not going to be quiet running up at 30 knots, but
Nor
a
is
submarine is completely deaf at 30 knots. A surface ship, however, well, if it's got helicopters, its sonar techs are not, or equivalent, are not deaf because they have the sonobuoys.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Next question.
Yes. On YouTube, 1981, for Foxo, in Azure Lane's version of 1908 when the Sirens first appear, how correct is it to say the American Pacific and Great White fleets have been totally wiped out?
Yes.
Yes. That's pretty much the only answer to that question. There's no...
Nice.
Very...
Most of humanity is wiped out.
Well, I'm glad that was a short one, so Fleet doesn't have to lose
The
his mind
point, there
again.
is 3 cities on the American East Coast still standing. That's how fucked the planet gets.
Please tell me one of them is not Staten Island. Oh, its silence is killing me.
It's
trying to
Staten
remember where
Island,
it's
the one in New York.
Yeah, it's in New York.
New York survives.
New York survives. I think it's Newport survives. And it's one of the others.
I actually want to say Halifax might be one of the ones that in Canada that actually wasn't completely annihilated.
Yeah.
Until it destroyed itself. No, I was kidding.
Okay, so, YouTube question.
Discord.
Sorry, yeah. I can learn. Brandon Larson, do you think we will see any modern ships and aircraft in sea power eventually? Yes, absolutely. Basically,
Define modern.
If the devs don't get to it, modders will.
Right, if you're going off that, then yes.
If you're going with modders, yes. With the devs, highly unlikely.
Yeah, I was including modders in that. I was just saying, like, he didn't say... Because the question wasn't, do you think the devs will add it? It was, do you think they will appear?
I think... So, Fleet, I think it
real.
was implied that it was as an official part of the game.
Oh, I'm sorry, but... I
define modern.
Yeah, but...
Yeah, I could say, isn't the F-14 like 40 years old now?
Older. Much older.
But yeah,
the Ticonderoga twin-arm design is a half-century old.
Yeah, it's like...
These things are nowhere near modern, and this is a perception that I actually find quite irritating. To be blunt, because you see it even in history circles, and this is something that I know a couple people are very, very peeved about.
History has failed to move into the modern era of warfare, especially at sea.
Gunnery officer, yes, it is a command-guided missile. If you know where you want to send it, you can command it to go there.
Right. Next question then, Fleet.
I suppose so.
I think that's a pretty quick and simple one.
It was, wasn't it?
Back.
1961 for Foxo again. If you were the Azure Lane port commander, wouldn't you want, due to the bane of being the commander, paperwork, have a secretarial staff to mean the commander does not get overworked? Well, yes, that's why as a naval officer in a flag rank, you have a staff. That's literally the whole
No, you
point.
don't. The commander doesn't have staff. It is just him.
Well, that's
Yes.
well, that's silly.
It is him and a grand total of up to, at most, 5 secretaries, of which only one does work.
Then what's the point?
So
of
how
the
have
other 4?
how have the antagonists not just won decisively by this point? Because are they just that bad at killing things that aren't,
I feel
regular
like
humans?
Right,
I
that
feel
aren't
like they're
Phoenix-
deliberately
no,
pulling their
Phoenix.
punches.
Wait a second. Wait, Phoenix.
They
Which
actually are, Fleet.
No. Which antagonists are we talking about here? Are we talking the Sirens, the Ashes, Being X, or the other group?
You just said a bunch of words that I have no fucking.
I did
clue
not realize
what
there were that many groups of antagonists, but like any of them.
So the main group
Because-
of antagonists is the Sirens.
Sirens.
Oh,
They were the game
And
was
they
based on.
are playing with humanity.
They are literally trying to force humanity to get better.
Yeah. they're quite
mass
literally.
murder, they have some
Yes.
interesting.
Well, Phoenix, they were created by humanity. They were created by humanity to put other humanities through trials to try and make them more ready for the bigger enemy.
This just feels like an incredibly stupid way to do things.
This
Well, the
is
other-
white man's
Well-
burden,
Well,
but
Fleet, the problem is they tried the other way, and the big enemies learned of it and immediately wiped those realities out.
It's not just that, Dragon. It's a case of we know it's hinted at, and it's sort of semi-known
What's his
that the
name?
sirens are defective. Like they're not
Yes.
supposed to be doing it like this.
But the sheer fact that Purifier, one of the sirens, actively makes anime references in canon
I hate
to
this.
ship girls.
I hate this fucking.
Okay,
put
let's
in the
move
weeb
on.
stuff. There are
So-
weebs.
We've already answered the question. Let's move.
For once,
You would probably want Secretary of Staff, but
for
you're not
one-
getting it.
For once, Cyclic is on my side.
That's because he doesn't
I
call
will-
the AL.
The boat girls can take care of themselves.
I will take what little victories I can get. Admiral Wellesley asks on YouTube, in a hypothetical German victory in the Great War, could we have still seen a naval treaty? No, the British, because in any German victory in the Great War will basically involve, yes, they'll be able to dictate on the continent what happens, but you better believe the British basically walk away with no concessions of any kind given to the
I was
Germans.
about to say, what is the victory of the Great War here? Because Britain, well, good luck for Germany to shut down Britain that hard.
No, then-
especially depending on when this is.
You've basically got Britain continuing the war trying to starve out Germany, and Germany probably squeezing out a victory by basically just nicking off with the food.
Or are we
with-
assuming basically the submarine campaign manages to force the British to the table, perhaps?
I would say
Because
ultimately it doesn't
No.
really matter.
It works, and
Yeah.
they capitulate. from
Yeah, it doesn't really matter because we're looking 10
Post-war.
years and 10 years post-war. So
No naval
Um,
treaty.
Well, I think the fundamental thing is the fact that the naval treaties happened the way they did because all the victors were on the same side and had no interest in arms racing with each other when they had no fundamental reasons to fight. That
Yeah.
was the biggest single motivator. Everyone wanted to save money and had no reason to build out their fleets any further because all their enemies were killed.
That's no longer the case.
if this is not the case, then you're not getting any kind of treaty out of this at all.
That's why I
Everyone
think
is
I'm
going to
looking
continue
10
to go
years
back
ahead
to square
too
one.
far. Because I don't even looking 10 years is too far. Because if Germany has won this war, Britain will be constantly building its fleet bigger and bigger during this period.
To a certain
They
point.
can't afford not. Oh,
Bear-
you're probably seeing the admirals finished. You're probably
Yes.
seeing bigger from beyond that.
Yes, I'm
Britain
aware of
isn't
that.
going to slow down.
The thing is, Dragon, Britain, even in the case of a hypothetical German victory, the Germans will still have to basically sit as the second or third rank. Basically, depending on whether the US overtakes them and when the US overtakes them.
Well, I think that's why I was saying it also depends on when things happen.
The
'cause
reason
does it give the US enough of a kick to do so?
the reason
They'll
that
still be
I
trying to build up the fleet.
the reason that I say this is that you're probably going to see even though there'll be no treaties, the navy settle into a comfortable status quo again, is basically down to simple geopolitics. The US, even in a world where Germany wins, is still not going to have the stomach for a naval race with the UK, given the fact it's already surpassed the German Navy, and the German Navy has to get through the UK to get to them. The German Navy isn't going to be racing with the Royal Navy anyway, just looking to maintain their present size, or perhaps a navy slightly smaller than the one they currently have in terms of capital ship
think
numbers.
That's not looking at
Given-
the Germans through what they were doing.
Dragon, the Germans gave up on the naval race 2 years before the outbreak of the Great War. They now have a massive land.
That's
they
not
they-
true, though.
It is in numerous documents.
Then why were they continuously fighting the army for funding to build these bigger ships to try and keep up their thing?
They they lost that fight in 1912.
But right, they might have lost it, but it didn't stop them from trying. We see that they keep trying to the bitter end.
Try
Look at
does
L20.
not mean
Look at the L20 design.
yes, Dragon. That's a pair of battleships.
If they are the victor, there is the potential.
you
that the
two get a
German-
room already. You're like an old married couple.
No, I've got Foxer for that cyclic.
Yeah, he's mine, bitch.
Okay, so then you need to beat the shit out of Fleet. Got it.
As I was
She
trying,
does that frequently.
As I was trying to say
Okay.
before you jumped on me, the German Navy has already lost the funding war, and they lost it in 1912. The designs they are working on are designs for ships to continually cycle new capital ships into the fleet, which is what you do when you have a large navy. It is not a naval race. It is continuing to cycle new generations of capital ships into the fleet. And you'll notice that the German Navy is now building 2 capital ships a year rather than 4. They are now cycling capital ships into the Navy to continually upgrade the battle line as the years go forwards. Just like the Royal Navy are doing, but the Royal Navy are doing it on a larger scale. Just like the US Navy is doing, again, on a larger scale.
I would once again point out their plans kind of counter this, though, fleet. Again, you say they're not trying to keep... Yes, they are still cycling, but we look at the L20 series through 24.
Yes.
They are still in an arms race situation to the Germans.
That's not an arms race. That's just ships getting bigger, you colossal lemon.
Fleet. Consider this. Even if the arms race dies down, the arms race dies down because the Germans are looking at the continent.
Yes,
that's what
I've been trying to say for the last 20
Yes, but
let
me finish. Once continental hegemony is achieved, the arms race begins again.
Foxo, bold of you to assume that the Germans can ever afford to turn away from keeping the continent under check. They basically can't. They're trying to hold. They're trying to.
But they
hold
also
down,
have to.
They're not.
It's also, if you look at the Germans' plans for what they wanted from France, France is gimped.
Yes,
Russia's in a civil war. Spain, it's better not to talk about Spain.
Yeah, Foxo.
Austria's going to be doing its attempt to self-immolate.
Well, yes, and that's will probably lead to a German intervention at some point to try and.
Who's left to challenge German hegemony?
No, Foxo, it's not about challenging German hegemony. What I've been trying to say is you're talking about a German empire that has gone through a ruinously expensive war, whose economy is in shambles and will take a while to recover, and now has to maintain and lock in, for at least 2 decades, if they ever succeed in actually locking them in, numerous puppet states in Eastern Europe, one of which is Ukraine, which will not be easy to pacify. In fact, if they're ever pacified at all. You're talking about a massive continuous commitment of manpower, materiel, and financial resources to keep this all in check. If the German Navy... Well, the German Navy may not get funding for new capital ships for 5 years after the end of the Great War.
No,
Dragon,
that's not happening.
Yeah, Dragon, it's hard to overstate.
But it's just going to be the case of replacing the pre-dreadnoughts as they age out.
Yeah, it's hard to overstate. Just like the German economy had been self-immolated to fund the war. In the aftermath of the war, you think the British economic situation that everyone larps on about is heck, even the French.
No, we don't think it's bad because we know it isn't as bad as made out.
Alternatively, you could have let me finish my fucking sentence again.
No, because you spoke over me, which is why you're not understanding what I'm trying to fucking say. If the Germans have won, their economy isn't as fucked as it is in our timeline. It can't be, because the economic collapse of Germany is what starts essentially a revolution that almost succeeds, and that's what leads to the end of the First World War.
Which is what
if Germany has won, that means that didn't happen, and Germany has some degree of economy.
Yes.
Now we know from what happens. We know what happens in World War One and later on World War Two. The Germans are quite happy to loot the economies of mainland Europe to sustain their own.
Yes, this isn't the Second World War though. They're not occupying the entirety of France and Eastern Europe. What is there to loot?
But even in World War One, they looted Eastern Europe to the ground. People forget that the Germans looted the occupied Ukraine, occupied Poland, occupied Belarus, so hard it started famines. It's just looked over because what happened in the Second World War. The Kaiser Germany is quite happy to do that.
Yes, but I still think the two of you are giving the Germans far too much economically than they would actually have, and you're also completely.
I think
ignorant.
Phoenix might have something to say. I keep thinking I'm hearing him. I'm not sure if I am or not.
I'm
trying to get
saying
a word
anything right now. I'm just letting this play out because I don't know if this is a useful way to get a word in edgewise right now.
Look, the German. You can't just say, "Oh yes, German Navy will start rearming again." Like their long-term plan is for a final knockdown drag-out fight with Britain. We know this from German documentation. However, you cannot just say they're easily going to be able to lock down half a continent and in a couple of years. No. You're
Who said
talking.
They don't have to. They don't have to.
They do though.
Why are they invading half a continent?
They already occupy half a
Because
continent.
Italy.
From Ukraine to the western border of France, the Germans have to garrison all of that because their puppet states are not going to have any local.
But most of that's mainland Germany.
At this point in time, that's still a lot of Imperial Germany. That is,
Are you
Yeah.
telling
we
me
already still
that,
work with Germany.
Are you telling me that
A good chunk
Ukraine
of
is
Go on, Cyclic.
go on,
like.
sorry.
Watson is also.
Moo,
quite
do
easily
you wanna pop up into voice here, or are you good just to keep listening?
This isn't Hoy. The model here is 1871. Yeah. Do I want to? Not especially. Understand.
But we literally know the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. What states would have existed in the aftermath of the war?
Nominally as
Right.
states.
Yes, this is why I keep saying that they have to be garrisoned and controlled directly by the Reich. Because
But only if the war ends in a similar way to how the German situation was
Yeah.
at Bretland. Like,
This is why I do
that's
say-
why I'm saying, what if Germany winning the war is that Schlieffen works, they capitulate France within the first month,
This is why I said this all
and
depends.
just turn everything east. Like, they could do it. It's unlikely, but German victory at all is unlikely. It's if they were to win the war, probably, I think the most likely thing the Germans would have done is basically do an 1871 again, blitz through France, smash Russia hard enough that they go, fuck it, we don't want to fight over this anymore. So maybe some concessions in the east, but probably not much. The Germans are just sort of going to ride this out as a, look, we've got a bit more land in the east, we've won, hooray. Their economy's probably not going to have done much in like maybe up to a year.
This is why I said at the very beginning, if people remember, it depends on how the war went.
Exactly.
And if that happens, and they do decide to go all the way with Russia, they've put themselves against the British in the same issue Napoleon was. And Napoleon did try to build a fucking fleet.
yes, he did, but the difference, well, the problem I've got is that it depends entirely which of us is right on how the debate in the aftermath of whatever war this is goes between the army and the navy.
I'm just gonna say I think we have we've basically tunneled down this rabbit hole well past the original question of like the likelihood of a post-war treaty and what that would
It's
look
not
like.
gonna
I mean, that was answered.
gonna happen.
That was
Yeah.
answered in the first 10 seconds.
Yeah, and now we've gone on.
We
this
need to
whole
move on.
Side shoot. Yeah, let's just move on because otherwise we're not going to get out of this. Because once it comes down to, it depends on how the war ends. It's just that's so open-ended and goes in so many different directions that it's just impossible to answer.
Mm.
You know.
And
Yeah.
the reality is, there's just no treaty. Because there's no
What if
reason
democracies
for
are
a
dumb?
treaty.
What if the papacy mind controls all the Catholics in Europe to create an Catholic super state? And what's the treaty now? Because that's the end of the World War One you're dealing with. It's just impossible to answer.
Yeah, but that's
Just
going.
move on.
I get that that's the logical extreme, but
Yeah.
Well, that's
I'm
why
sorry,
it was
I
used.
welcome our new
Yes.
papal overlords.
I don't.
They revolt, infidel.
I laugh here. I sit over here and laugh as I start wondering about the strike option for continental Europe.
Bone Meal Boy asks, what is the breakout time for producing first rates from nothing in the 1700s, assuming a starting point of nothing larger than sloops?
Generations, because you've got to build up the apprenticeship and knowledge of the shipwrights.
And then, of
Can you
course,
borrow the
Unless you have
Dutch?
somebody who's done it overseas, along with a couple of other people, and even then, your first rates probably aren't going to hold themselves together.
and of course, you've got to crew them. And do you have the officer corps to do that?
Also, do you have the
Brandon,
cannon
that's not
boundaries?
really a question we're going to answer in this podcast, and it's not all that answerable.
Yeah, I'm entirely in agreement on that one. I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
I'm smart, but I'm not that smart.
You just
Um,
can't get a NATO equivalent like that and go into the
Yeah.
first place. We've tried. It's a non-starter.
Wasn't that Sito that
I
attempted
don't know
to
how
do
it
that?
happened. He was not doing this. We're not talking about it. Moving swiftly on. Timu Locker asks, "Oh, for God's sake!" So one evening, Fleet goes to bed. When he wakes up, he realizes he is in the Hosh. How excited would he be? Well, I'd be interested, Mark you, and I'd
In
probably
Western
Biting my
and
tongue.
I'd
Biting
probably
my tongue.
and I'd probably have a tape measure to go and measure exactly how much freeboard she actually has. But I'd want to examine the gun turrets.
Really biting my tongue.
Um,
I'm wondering if Cyclix what I'm
Oh,
thinking.
commento.
but overall, I
He
probably.
may need a change of underwear.
But
that's all I'm
also,
gonna
but
say.
also, I'm probably more horrified to not be where I was when I went to bed. My
He's
first
having a
perfectly
very
natural
interesting
response.
kind of dream, shall we say.
I've got a
My-
bigger
How's
concern
your French?
here. Yeah, all of a sudden you're now probably going to be surrounded by French Marines who
Yes,
are very curious of how this Englishman's ended up on board their ship, and an Englishman with a weird accent at that for an Englishman.
Mm.
And, all I'm gonna say is,
Well, it's Hosh, so it's not that terrible of one.
sailors have a stereotype of being gay, and so do the French.
Oh,
That's
no.
Nope. Nope.
What's the most? Oh God. Okay, well, so that's going to be an interesting one.
Okay,
they were-
so we're going to go for
Next.
another. We're going to go for another 15 minutes to half an hour. So probably cut off will be 7:30. And that's the one. So if the British have the Vought OS-2U3 Kingfishers in World War One, would that kill off the Walrus, or would the Walrus replace it? As the OS-2U3s were aboard HMS Ark Royal seaplane carrier in its life. The Walrus is basically the ideal catapult-launched aircraft for use aboard Royal Navy cruisers and capital ships. There's a reason why it becomes ubiquitous. It's better in a lot of. The Kingfisher has slightly better performance in some areas, but the Walrus is better suited to work in rougher seas than the Kingfisher, being a flying boat rather than a seaplane. It can handle rougher seas than a Kingfisher can.
Also, here's a question. So I know this says World War One, so I'm very curious how they ended in World War One. But the Walrus entered production before the Kingfisher and was in use before the Kingfisher.
Yeah, I assume so.
So
if
why would they swap over to it?
Yeah, so if it says World War One, then the
In World
Kingfishers.
War One, you've got a very big change.
Yeah, the Kingfishers are the most capable aircraft in the world at that point, bar none. So you've basically given the Royal Navy an extremely capable platform.
Except they don't really have anything
so-
to launch it off because none of the
Right,
ships
so-
have catapults. Yeah.
Ark Royal can do it. Ark Royal's
Well,
flying
I'm
off
trying to
deck
figure out
can
because
handle them.
he's talking about the Ark Royal seaplane tender.
Well, the original British aircraft carrying vessel. She was half seaplane carrier, half aircraft
Seaplane
carrier.
carrier.
No, she was half aircraft carrier as well.
She's-
She did have a flying off.
She's
deck.
referred to in the British things as a seaplane carrier, so I'm gonna stick with that bit for
Well,
now.
Drac calls her a quasi-aircraft carrier, so I'm sticking with his
I can
definition.
kind of understand why, but I'm trying to figure out when she gets these Kingfishers, though. in her life, 'cause-
The problem we've got here is that you've basically given the British something that's going to radically change the course of aviation. So we don't even know if the Walrus will even exist.
Well, it wouldn't. If Britain somehow gets this plane that's far more technologically advanced earlier, almost certainly not. Things
Yeah.
would be drastically different.
Tell me that means Blackburn ceases to exist.
I don't
It
know.
probably would.
So
No,
where,
it probably would, which is good.
Where was I? Oh, you can't be serious. Oh, this is gonna.
Of course, you
Well,
can.
see, it's called Björn.
Brandon Larson. Brandon Larson asks, Roman Empire at its height militarily versus the Mongol Empire, who wins? Well, first of all,
the
Mongols.
Mongol Empire.
yeah, well,
Mongols.
Oh, no, I thought it was the Mughal. Yeah. Mongols. So much more advanced, technically.
we see what happens when the Romans run into steppe empires. It leads to the
Heavy
Crusades because
infantry
they're that
army is not a
desperate.
good counter to
Yeah.
to the Mongols' way of warfare.
I mean, it's not even that. It's like when you look at Polish history, you find that one of the big things that stops the Mongols going that much further into Europe is, good God, how many castles are there? And sort of, we look at the Mongol conquest of China, you notice that I think it's the 11 cities in China that allow you, if you can control and siege them, you can take control of all of northern China. Europe, in the feudal period, doesn't really have that, but it does in the Roman period because it's still very centralized.
Yeah, it's basically you've handed the Mongols an easy world conquest. Congratulations.
No,
Well,
can't get
no,
to
you
Americas.
Well,
And,
and also, to be fair, I don't think they'd even be
Indians.
able to conquer, all of Europe and Asia. But
India kept them out until the Mughals, and the Timurids. But the Timurids weren't Mongols.
Yeah. So, well, that was fairly straightforward. On YouTube, Lions asks, okay, that English nearly broke my tongue. How would build a navy the size of the current U.S. Navy around a system like Stanflex? What the flip is Stanflex?
Something that gets talked about online that now that we have a better view into it involves a lot of shouting across the CIC coordinates so you can fire your harpoons instead of proper integration of
And
stuff.
running cables through passages.
Yeah.
That,
you don't build a
also-
navy the size of the United States Navy that way because it will not function.
Stanflex is one of those things that's great in theory, not so much in practice, and also the way it is applied is just you don't do that if you have a navy the size of the United States Navy. It's a thing that makes sense for much smaller navies, because of their size and the difficulties they run into. But
Okay, so I've been educated about what's Stanflex.
We just
yeah,
literally had that described.
yeah, but
What's Phoenix?
So it is a system essentially where you have modules of various weapon systems or sensors and such that can be removed from different points of a design, so they can be swapped out, and you basically reconfigure the ship based off of this. So let's say you have one module that might be, sometimes that space could take a module for, say, surface to air missiles, or it could take a gun, or it could take, or another area could take, say, anti-ship missiles, or the rear of the ship could potentially swap out between variable depth sonars equipped, I guess, for anti-submarine warfare, or say an MCM module, whatever it happens to be. And this allows you to reconfigure the same basic hull for various tasks. Now, in practice, actually having all this stuff hooked up internally within the ship to be able to switch between any function is generally not as much as it's advertised. In the case of the Danish Navy, which is the one that really rolled this out, in a lot of cases these things are not well integrated in the CIC. They have things like cables running from like anti-ship missiles to other parts of the ship for the actual firing functions, but like literal cables through like passages you walk through and such, which is really not something you want to do for damage control at all. It's kind of messy. I mean, there's the reason it made sense for the Danes, or the reason the Danes felt it made sense, is that they have a limited number of ships that they want to have to do multiple different types of tasks, because sometimes I'd be using them for long-range deployments, sometimes I'd be using them for closer to home water deployments, which is, say, where MCM is a lot more useful for them. And they wanted to have the ability to swap in relatively short periods of time between different types of modules for different types of missions, because they simply could not build a number of specialized ships or even large multi-role ships to do all these tasks.
Okay, so it's like an attempt to make a modular sort of plug-and-play ship.
Yeah.
Which sounds great on paper, but it just fundamentally doesn't work.
Plug and play almost never works in practice.
Zidal just put an image in Theatre at Sea, which I don't know how exactly it works, but it's at least a very quick and rough way to possibly see kind of how it might be. Of literally stick the thing in slot.
Again.
Oh. So, but it doesn't really work then.
Nope, because you want to know one of the ships that was supposed to have a system like this? Drumroll, please. The Independence class and the LCSs.
Stanflex is a very different system in how they attempted to approach it. The reason LCS went the way LCS did on that was because it just didn't make sense. Stanflex was an approach from a setup that made sense for swapping your missions around. The ship retained the same core crew. They were trained on the systems, and they were all sort of functions of what you would expect a guided missile frigate to do, generally. LCS was trying to swap between highly technical missions that require very different approaches to ship maneuvering and ship handling and just how you run your ship. And these specialized personnel were not part of the crew. They would come on with the mission modules, and you were supposed to hot swap these around mid deployment. Whereas Stanflex, it was more for a mix of the sort of updating the ships or retrofitting. It was not anywhere near as hot swappable in the intent for how they were going to use it. Very quickly, LCS pivoted to semi-permanent installation of the mission modules, which is much similar. The other problem LCS had was 3 crews per 2 ships. You just never got any ship ownership, and now they're on a blue crew and a gold crew. So 2 crews per 1 ship. So the ship can be out on deployment for a year, but the crews are only out for like 6 months. Just because you have a modular setup does not mean it's equivalent to to LCS, or even really where the problem was with LCS. There were far more problematic issues in the program that were the issues for it.
Okay, so the Stanflex.
Fox,
In
I'm
reality,
gonna
it's
have
all-
to stop you there.
I just want one more question. To
No, I'm
understand this
sorry.
properly.
I get being part
It's
of
a
the
yes or
panel
no
is-
question.
All right, but I really do need
So-
you to. Sorry, go on.
So the Stanflex system ended up kinda like how the multi-fuel engine, the Chieftain, worked, where it wasn't really good at anything and required quite a bit of work to use a different fuel.
It wasn't that way. But it sounds like we don't have the time to get into it. It was an engineering issue and a implementation of the concept.
Next question, Fleet.
Okay. I believe. Well, we already answered that one because Cyclic already talked about Talos and its capability to use a land attack missile.
Yeah.
Brackman asks, actually, never mind. Nope, not that one.
Should be how much would it cost to map
Admiral-
the entire floor?
How much does mankind map the entire ocean floor as a UN venture? Physically impossible with current technology. As in, the entire ocean floor. It's
And
fundamentally...
even if it was doable, it would cost an utter fortune.
You'd basically have to devote the entirety of human endeavour to it, with the technology we currently possess. Just because of how much raw space you're talking about, and the challenges you would have to overcome.
Even then, seawater very corrosive. It wouldn't stick around particularly long at high pressure. Permanently down there.
Next question.
Probably be a...
There's no more YouTubes.
Oh, no, there isn't. There's a conversation going on, but there's no questions. Rackman asks, what would you consider the better antagonist, the Sirens from Azure Lane or the Abyssals from Cankali? Abyssals, obviously.
Abyssals.
I personally prefer the Sirens. It depends what you want from the antagonist, though.
Thing is, I like the Abyssals because...
We've literally just got to that one, Brackman.
It feels like they're supposed to be the ravaged souls of ships from the past who feel betrayed by
I think
either ships not built or ships cancelled on the slipway, or I think things like that are what they're supposed to be.
I think the reason why I prefer the Abyss...
call-
I think... Go on.
Oh, Never mind. Sorry.
I was going to say, the reason why I prefer the Sirens more is... They, to me, feel more like a Sirens. They feel more like a Sirens. They feel more like a Sirens.
Uh,
Sirens actually have a storyline, even if it's a mediocre one. The Abyssals don't.
I mean,
It's a problem I have with Casey in general. Is there's not really an actual storyline, so it's. I get they're the bad guy, but they don't feel like an antagonist
Well,
to
if
me.
I'm not mistaken, the whole thing with the Abyssals and the KC storyline is basically they were kind of dancing around the whole thing of what if Japan fight America and win the Pacific War, and all these actions are reverse actions of the Pacific War.
Yeah,
So thus these Abyssals were really the Americans and the Allies all along.
yeah. The Abyssals are the U.S. Navy. It's why.
But not really.
No, they are. They actually, if you go onto the actual Kankule wiki and read through it,
Well, no, because you get
almost
stuff
all of
like
them are
Crane
US.
Princess, which is Taiho.
Yeah, you get some which aren't, but almost the majority of them are US ships. Like the re-battleships are versions of Iowas, excluding the 20-inch gun variant.
The Rees a battle carrier dragon.
A lot of
One of the
KCs
Rees is a battle carrier. As
stuff
Wesley's
is-
pointing out, there's a lot of historical revisionism as well.
Yeah,
in
because like
stuff.
if
which
you
is-
go off the anime, and I know it wasn't not the most highly rated thing, but essentially the ship girls are sort of the positive memories of the ship, like what you think of, like essentially.
murdering civilians, but doing it cutely and kawaii. Yes.
Yeah, but it's sort of like the glorious sort of like what you. It's like essentially because it's the reason you can have Enterprise and the Grey Ghost at the same time, because one's made of the Americans' memories and idea of what Enterprise is. One's based on what Japan thought of Enterprise.
Yeah,
And
Like,
so
I think the
it's-
anime is kind of separate from the
it is.
the
It's
early
very
period.
different.
Yeah, but
How it was
it's the
developed in
only one
background.
with a story, because
It's like
KC the
the,
game doesn't have a story.
Even then, it's not got much of a story.
But it's
Like-
just the story is kind of layered in subtext of revisionism.
Yeah.
And it's not trying to be an overt about it. But if you look, especially if you look at the comments of some of the creators, where they ironically enough, one of the creators criticized AL as basically for the fact that it was not trying to refight the war, and that it was hollow and empty and did not capture the spirit of what KC was doing, which was again kind of nationalist, refight the Pacific War, the Allies bad and Japan strong, do no wrong. What if we give all of our ship girls these cute personality traits and laud them for things that were effectively propaganda efforts during the war? So, for example, what's the one that really has always stuck out? The one that says "poi" all the time.
Yudachi.
Yudachi, yeah. So that's a really good example, actually, because she's a destroyer that. So what exactly she did during one of the naval battles of the Solomons is kind of mixed. But current scholarship, what it actually is generally agreed on is what she did is basically is not nearly as much as she's lauded for in a lot of the post-war accounts that basically made her like the whole demon of the Solomons things and really overrated what she did. But she's in KC, she's the demon of the Solomons, and she's this murder machine. But also cute on the side, which is also really funny if you look at her earlier career during the Pacific War and some of the things she did to sailors in the water, which is really not kawaii. It is war crimey, but that's besides the point, I guess. Actually, no, it is part of the point. What am I saying? But yeah, so KC has a lot of what we would call now, I guess, the ick around it.
Oh, please.
But there's a story there. It's just not one we like to talk about, I guess.
Oh, it's not even really that much of a story. It's the subtext, but in terms of an actual story, there is just none, apart from fight. And
I mean, a good portion of it is
fight the
what if we
Allies.
refight the Pacific War, but this time we have the Americans helping us?
No.
Because
No,
I
I
mean,
feel
we
like-
get
I
American
feel-
ships in it.
I feel like we're I think we're really hammering the point home here. I think we've.
Well, we're discussing what the different positives and negatives are. This is actually one of the better discussions about the anime stuff.
Yes, but I do feel
I
like
don't necessarily agree, Akmu, that the 70% of the ships in Azure Lane are half-assed. Like,
I mean, I feel like what I've heard, the references to the ship's real life careers are not as good, or generally are not as well done as Casey did them. But which is again also part of the
It's also
criticisms that were leveled at AL by some of the devs behind KC. But this is also because AL is trying to be a lot more neutral on this kind of stuff.
and AL's also gone the role of, yeah, they're based off the historical ships, but also it's been like years now they've developed their own personalities and quirks. They're not just this anymore. Like, they are living beings that don't just be what we think they should be. Yeah, so then, do you want to move on, Fleet, before we end up shortly? Because didn't you say you wanted to call it soonish?
Yes, we're 20 minutes from now.
You said that about 20 minutes ago.
No, I said 40. I said 50 to half an hour, aiming for 7:30.
Right.
I did hear him say 7:30.
Right.
96831 asks, would it be accurate to say that no one really wanted a 10,000-ton cruiser with 8-inch guns? Yeah, pretty much.
No.
The whole reason
No.
that you get that tonnage limit around Washington is because that was a little bit bigger than the largest cruiser that a power was operating, that being the Hawkins. And they said, well, okay, let's take the Hawkins and run it through the expansion machine at, I think, 25% expansion, and boom, there we go. There's your maximum tonnage for cruisers. Of course,
I'm gonna say no.
What that led to then was everyone going, okay, here's the maximum, and now we want cruisers that are this.
Maybe you should let Phoenix speak.
Yeah, so the thing is, both the Americans and the Japanese were looking at 10,000-ton light cruisers with 8-inch guns or guns around that size before the treaty actually was even started being hammered out. This was because they needed scout cruisers for the Pacific, and this is about the size that they wanted to move up to. So Hawkins was obviously, from the British perspective, a big motivator for going to that displacement. But realistically speaking, the three largest navies were all looking at this tonnage range already. Really, the only exception I'd say is the French were not so seriously committed to it. I mean, granted, their pre-Washington Naval Treaty plan did call for 12,000-ton and 8,000-ton cruisers, but they were never really hammered out in terms of characteristics, especially the 12,000-tonners. And the Italians were also outright just not interested in that tonnage range. They preferred smaller cruisers for the sake of building more of them, but not for the British, have lots of cruisers for colonial patrol, but more for the scouting role. But for the larger navies, though, especially the Pacific navies, they were interested in that tonnage range. There's a whole series of designs in Spring Styles 1 of just various American cruisers that are along that displacement range. And some of that are a bit more zany than that, but lots of 10,000-ton 8-inch gun-up ships.
Because the British were already looking at larger ships, or 9.2-inch to be their standard, what would technically now be heavy cruisers, but then would not be because the term wasn't there. So yeah, no.
He said it! Yes! I finally had something stick.
What? Well, no, but I'm still going to call them heavy cruise from our perspective, but technically speaking, their term wouldn't have existed then. I do agree with that.
Tell us what Fleet's talking about.
Anyway.
Basically, if you remember, like 6 or 7 ramblings ago, for the sake of ease, we called things heavy cruisers and light cruisers because it was easier for most people to understand. Because of the way ship development is going, and Fleet was going, no, they should always be known as like armored cruisers and such, because the treaty didn't exist. No. It's easier just to say it this way, because honestly, I'm not even sure the term armored cruiser would have stuck around in the 30s and 40s.
What became the heavy cruiser was the light cruiser, or a branch of light cruiser. They weren't armored cruisers at all.
The heavy cruiser is just a light
just
cruiser.
Gun size.
With
guns.
That's
that was
entirely
decided
correct.
In the 19. Well, really, it's just the London Treaty that actually makes the split.
Yeah.
But
I honestly do still see the terms potentially of heavy and light cruiser coming up. Just heavy cruiser would be a ship with an armored belt and 9.2-inch guns for the British, say, and the light cruiser might have been the 8-inch, or even still stick with 6-inch sort of ships.
they would. I would guess honestly they'd probably go back to kind of the class system. That's actually what the French did, which is interesting. So the French had up until 1930, you were either an armored cruiser or you were a light cruiser if you were the new modern types. And after the London Treaty, the French said, okay, abolish armored cruiser, abolish light cruiser, and now it's caliber based. And if you have a gun larger than 155 millimeter, you are a first class cruiser, and if you have a gun 155 millimeter or smaller, you are a second class cruiser.
Very nice.
And I I suspect that would be kind of you would get because that was really what preceded the light cruiser armored cruiser split. Or you actually even during that period, a lot of navies did not formally use light or armored cruiser. They just used you are a cruiser of the first class or the second class or the third class. The Italians took it a step further, where everything was a first, second, third, or fourth, or fifth, or sixth class battleship, depending on its what kind of ship it was and also its age.
Christ,
Bizarre.
are they really going back to the whole rating system?
I mean,
basically.
I'm not even kidding when I say this. It is a thing that existed. I mean, ships were still offhand referred to as say, armored cruisers or scout cruisers or whatever. But like,
you gotta love the Italians.
There were even armored cruisers that were classified as first class battleships because of how the fleet was formed.
Oh, you've gotta love the Italians. It just.
It took a little bit of a different approach, but yeah.
Oh. Right. So, final question, since I think it probably lead to an interesting discussion about the air defence of the UK during the Cold War, and Falklands War, another discussion on the Falklands War. YouTube Gunnery Officer asks, in the last question I'm answering for today, there was a plan for the Avro Vulcan to be fitted with at least 8 AM-54 Phoenixes and turn them into bomber killers. If this plan was carried out, would the RAF use the Vulcan as an interceptor during the Falklands War and also to defend the British Isles against Soviet bombers? The latter was absolutely the role that airframe and that conversion was intended for. During the Falklands War, probably not, given that by that point they'd probably be still as...
If you could get them into position to deal with the Argentine Air Force's mid-air refueling capability and what the aircraft they use for maritime patrol, they'd be very useful there. It's just a matter of doing that.
Because to get even one Vulcan down to bomb the airfield at Port Stanley, that was an exercise in actually attempting to perform a long-range mission with mid-air refueling assets. Like, that was an exercise in and of itself. Trying to keep multiple Vulcans out performing patrol for incoming Argentine air power. That may be a bit much of an ask for Royal Navy refueling assets.
You're not going to be able to keep them up for patrols, no.
But in regards to actually defending the UK, yeah, absolutely. Like, you've basically just given the British, the Royal Air Force yes, I cast bomber be gone. Because if the first missile don't get him, the second one might, and if that don't get him, the third one might. Then...
Wait, but my question is, would their role be not to intercept the Vulcans going in for a nuclear, be to protect the bombers going in for a nuclear strike instead of defending the home isles?
No, because you try and send that. The problem is the missiles it's carrying. And more importantly, the type of aircraft carrying them. Given the RAF, well, first of all, the whole point of this is that the RAF's bombers were being retired / taken off nuclear strike duties at this point and handing off the role of deterrence to the incoming fleet of SSBNs the British were just receiving at the time. And one of the reasons this is taking place is because one of the reasons this whole conversion is being considered is that the Vulcan still has airframe hours in it. It's a relatively decent performing airframe. It's got a fairly effective radar for the era of aircraft that it is. And you're looking at... Basically, this is one of the proposals for reuse of the airframe. Even if you'd gotten something like the BAC TSR-2 and, let's say, the V-bomber fleet or some form of British airborne nuclear deterrence had remained, you really don't want to be sending an aircraft that is solely armed with multiple AM-54s in as a low-level escort for something like the BAC TSR-2 on a nuclear strike mission. You're just asking to get that aircraft shot down before it fires any missiles at all.
I mean, it would be pretty good at keeping MiG-25s away and stuff like that, but the problem is you don't have it's not going to be a useful escort. It's much better at doing counter bomber, and it just comes down to the fact that for a counter escort, you got no AWACS coming with you, so you don't know where those escorts are, those interceptors are coming from outside of your RWR if they have theirs on, and it's entirely possible that because the Soviets will know that you have this capability. It's entirely possible the Soviet fighters don't have their radars on until their ground controllers tell them to flip them on. So you don't know they're there until they're firing missiles right at you, in which case you're done.
I see. I remember reading about what's it, electronic warfare Vulcans being a part of strike packages during red flag operations. I was wondering, would they not try and do something similar with the Vulcans if they could get that working on them?
I mean, EW helps. The problem in this case is that air-to-air combat does not favor an aircraft like this engaging fighters at all, just in the kinematics of it. A Vulcan armed with a bunch of Phoenix missiles is going to be very good at killing inbound Soviet bombers, particularly blinders trying to strike up at northern Scotland in the event of a war.
You've also got a potential other use case of Vulcans, if paired with Victor tankers, in the event of a hot war that hasn't gone nuclear, being an asset that can be used to strike at backfires if they sortie, for whatever reason. Wherever they're going.
Or better, honestly, bears.
Yeah, that as well.
For really going out and hunting. Because you can base them out of Keflavik. You can totally base them out of Keflavik. And suddenly a huge part of the battle area there where the Soviets are trying to establish sea control or sea denial, northern half of the Greenland and Norwegian seas, the Soviets aimed to establish sea control, the southern half towards the GIUK Gap sea denial. You could start pushing these out and really hampering Soviet ISR capabilities, hampering the bombers. Now this could get awkward as, if the Soviets take some air bases in northern Norway, well ahead of where NATO really planned to put meaningful forces.
Because then you might have things like MiG-31 coming out.
Not MiG-31, probably more like the MiG-25s. MiG-31's going to be held back.
For defense
defense of the Soviet Union itself, in all likelihood. But it would be helpful there. Then again, it's also sort of a mission the Tomcat can do with refueling from aircraft off of a carrier, but it would be very helpful.
It basically means you don't have to have a carrier.
I mean, you have to have carriers up there anyways. I mean, you can have surface action groups and stuff like that, but
what I mean is it frees up US carrier aviation to do other things.
To do what other things?
Whatever else the US plan to use their Tomcats for in this.
The primary battle area is the area we are talking about here. One of the big roles of outer air battle is going after these, and the Tomcats will be far more responsive. These will be helpful for other things, but for other operations, but realistically, you're probably not going up there without 2 carriers in a group.
Yeah.
Minimum. In a wartime, and it's because your air threat is so extreme. They could. I'm not saying that these wouldn't be helpful. They would be. It's just the Tomcats are going to be, because here's the other thing, right? The Forestals continued to operate F4S well into the F4 Phantoms well into the 80s, because they couldn't operate Tomcats until they got deck reinforcements. So for groups like that, having 1 to 2 of these around, I mean, they wouldn't be able to really tank them up or anything, but having some of these around would be very helpful.
I mean, we've also opened
because you are not meaningfully ranging out very far with an F4 and AIM 7M.
No. What can you fit? I'm just thinking about these aircraft generally. What can you fit on the pylons you use to carry AM-54? What other US ordnance could you fit on those pylons? I'm just thinking sort of just generally here.
It's a unique pylon.
Oh.
Nothing other than AIM-54.
Well, I mean, I suppose since they are pylons under the wings of the Vulcan, it would still have its bomb bay available.
It's going to dramatically impact your performance in the air-to-air.
Oh no, I'm not saying they'd be carrying bombs as well. What I'm saying is, you've got them for the air-to-air role, and you've still got them for conventional.
And there's pylon adapters and stuff like that too. So,
because what I was thinking is, if you can carry, let's say, it can carry 12 AM-54s, could it not also carry 12 Harpoon? If pylon adapters are fitted, or 6 Harpoon?
Yeah, if you can put pylons on it, you can put other pylons on it. But in terms of maritime strike, maritime airstrike is not something the Allies are lacking up in this area. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, you've got a point there.
You can fly a lot of things out of Keflavik. A lot. Some of them carry 12 harpoons at once.
What aircraft are you referring to?
Why, none other than the masterful B-52.
Oh my god, I forgot the buff could do that. It's the yes, me and my 6 friends have created a missile swarm so large you can't stop
suddenly 4 B-52s is a very, very, very scary threat.
Basically, the Allies can do with 4 B-52s what the Soviets need 2 regiments of backfires to do in terms of sheer missile numbers.
It gets scarier than that, because funny thing about sea power, it is still a game. And you'll notice that the Soviets do all right in intercepting Harpoon and TASM. The developers are very aware of the fact that, that's not really much of a thing. The Soviets are primarily reliant on their electronic warfare systems.
It'd be really funny if somebody does a mod to correct that, because...
to be honest, I have a feeling there may end up being an additional difficulty added on later that's much more in line with that. But The Soviets have a SAM system that has a reasonable engagement floor, and keep in mind, engagement floors are not hard limits. So S300F has some level of marginal capability against a sea skimmer, just like SM2 does in this period. SM2 in this period is not very good at it either. It's really only the point defense systems in this period that have any meaningful chance. And this is where you want to either have it's specific point defense systems. Let me put it to you that way. So Sea Sparrow has some reasonable capability. The Italian Aspide system is probably the best one for this outside of Naval Tor, so SAN 9. Harpoon is sort of right at the bottom of SAN 9's engagement floor, but again, they're soft floors with these. They're not like, oh, it's hard fast, you're 1 meter below it and you can't. But that's not how it works. But so the Italian Aspide system, it's basically NATO Sea Sparrow, but better somewhat in terms of the interceptor. But then the Italians have this lovely reload system, so it doesn't take 30 minutes to reload the launcher.
What? Why did it take two world wars for the Italians to go, ah yes, let's really take the gloves off when it comes to creating weapons at sea? Like,
they had pretty good ships before the war.
Oh no, I'm aware of that. I'm more talking about certain aspects of their weapons were good before, but it's almost like the aftermath of the Second World War flipped a switch and they went from good weapons to holy fucking shit, these are the best fucking what the shit? Italy.
Well,
what the fuck?
It helps that they had Italy post-war was a lot richer, relatively speaking, in terms of like what companies could, like the spread of companies that could afford to develop this kind of stuff. Also, World War II is a weird case where they lost the war as a military effort, but they kind of won industrially because of the war effort. The mobilization effort brought so many people into factories and to have technical training on machine tools and other things that the actual skill level in the country of how to handle various in modern industrial systems was greatly expanded. This is one of the things that it's not often appreciated, but say when pre-war and the interwar period, there's such a focus on motorization and mechanization of society as a whole, because that is a prerequisite to doing so with your military. You have to have people who are familiar with trucks and engines and tractors to actually have a population to pull from that can then service those in the field. So in a certain sense, the mobilization effort of World War II actually really helps the Italians post-war when they can start rebuilding, and particularly because they signed an armistice in the middle in the start of the late war, right, and became co-belligerents, right. They were allowed to actually keep their military post-war. A lot of the same states institutions stayed, so they were able to start rebuilding themselves earlier. Whereas, say for example, in the case of Germany and Japan, their militaries were outright abolished. And their industrial capacities were greatly reduced, and then took a while to build up because their militaries were only reestablished in the 50s. Granted, it also has to be said the Italians were also benefiting, at least when it comes to the Italian Navy, they were benefiting from also joint efforts with foreign countries and buying systems abroad. So, for example, the Italian Navy did not have to bear the expense of developing medium and long-range missiles because they bought them from the Americans during the war. They did not start developing them for their own until the Aster system, which they developed with the French. But their missile programs were focused on the point defense / short range missile systems during the Cold War, which is a lot more manageable. If they had tried to do their own, medium to long range missile like Sea Dart or Mazurka that the British and the French did, it would probably have come out worse because the Italians don't have as much money to throw at these kind of programs. But they were a bit more focused in this period, so that certainly helped. They took on things they knew were important if they could handle. So these short range air defenses, surface to surface missiles, gun based systems, electronic warfare in particular is also a big one. Yeah.
Makes sense. And with that, that was a really nice question to end on, lads. Thank you very much for coming. As usual, a thoroughly fiery debate, but then again, I would hate to have it. I would hate to have it be all consensus. I'd much rather have people take me to loggerheads over things when I'm wrong. Wouldn't be ramblings otherwise. Hope you've all had a fantastic
We've
time.
got a meme made for it.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Sol's an absolute bro.
It wouldn't surprise me at all. Yeah, 5 minutes over time, but hey, what else is new? But yeah, thanks for coming, everybody. Hope you've all had a fantastic extra ramblings. Tune in on Monday, obviously, for ramblings. No Sea Power stream yet. No, there won't be one for a while. Anyway, thank you everyone for coming. Take care, folks, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.